Hey, everybody. Welcome to Talking Hockey Sense. My name is Chris Peters. It is episode 89 of the podcast, and it's summer. We're still talking hockey because that's what we do. That's all we do. And I was just at a big event, which we're going to talk about, the World Junior Summer Showcase. Also going to talk a bit about the Hlinka-Gretzky Cup today. And then a ton of questions, a lot of things about the 2024 draft, incoming recruiting classes, a bunch of those kind of things that as we're kind of rolling into September when we're going to start preseason and different things like that we're going to be talking a lot more in depth about. But since it is the summer, I think let's just take it easy. Let's ease into this thing and have some fun talking hockey because it's, even though it is August, we get these big events like the World Junior Summer Showcase, the Hlinka-Gretzky Cup, a U17 Five Nations. And there's plenty of stuff coming up here in the near future as well. But one thing to get you ready for the season now, because you got to start preparing. Wanted to let you know, if you are a Hockey TV subscriber, all of those events are now moving to FloHockey. So FloHockey.tv is where we're going to find all of that. You can go to hockeytv.com to claim, to get the proper links to claim your new FloHockey account. It's a great thing for if you are a current FloHockey subscriber. It means there are more games coming to FloHockey, and we've got a lot of new things coming for next season, including a new web experience and all these other things that everybody behind the scenes has been working on for quite some time, and we're getting ready to roll it out. But the initial steps are happening right now. So if you are a Hockey TV subscriber, it's time to move that over to FloHockey. You'll have all the details there. And if you do need additional assistance in getting that all set up, you can still reach out to support@hockeytv.com to get to the Hockey TV specific customer support team. Everybody from Hockey Tech is with FloHockey now. It's a great group of people based out of Waterloo, Ontario. They've obviously been one of the most important brands in amateur hockey for, going on over a decade now. And to have them as part of FloHockey and to have those events and more junior hockey, more youth hockey, having all of that on the FloHockey platform is super exciting for me, and it should be exciting for you as well, especially if you're a current subscriber, because your whole subscription just got a heck of a lot more valuable. So we're really excited for that. So keep an eye out for that. There's also a page on FloHockey.tv that you can find a little bit more information about this changeover. Nobody really loves change all the time, but I guarantee you this is a change for the better, and really looking forward to continuing to work with these leagues that are coming over as part of the FloHockey and Hockey Tech acquisition. So really great stuff there, and certainly something that you're going to have to keep an eye on because this season is going to be busy for us over at FloHockey. But so is this offseason. It's been a lot of work and certainly getting prepped for that, but also getting back to the rink where, you spend the first week of August in an ice arena, not typically the place where you would expect to be, maybe a beach perhaps, but not us. No, we are in the rinks and certainly wanted to give you a lot of coverage about that. So the World Junior Summer Showcase involves USA, Finland, and Sweden. It is a primary evaluation point for both the U.S. and the European nations as well. Team USA brought in 45 players, split them into two teams, and these are all players that are vying for spots at the 2024 World Junior Championship. Now, throughout this entire first half of the season, we're going to have a lot of World Junior Championship prep coverage. We're going to cover it even more in depth than we did last year. I'll be on site at the tournament, and that's why I was on site at the summer camp, because this is really those first steps. And so you get a lot of information about this tournament through about the World Juniors through that summer camp. A lot of decisions are made in the summer, and then players are kind of moved around based on how their first half of the season goes. But there are a lot of guys that can play themselves into contention, can play themselves out of contention in summer camp. But it's more about, this opportunity to see all these different combinations, try a bunch of different things. USA kept shuffling the rosters to try to get different mixes of players. And in the end, they came up with, what I think was a very competitive couple of days. Most of the teams there had splits. Like Finland was very competitive, Sweden was very competitive. Both of them went 2-2 on the week, and then the U.S. teams certainly had their hands full, but also had some great moments as well. And Like I said, the team will not be officially decided until December, but a lot of these decisions are starting to take shape now in the summer. And so on FloHockey.tv, there is a ton of written content that you can check out, but I'm going to summarize some of it for you right here on the podcast. But do go check out FloHockey.tv. We got World Junior Summer Showcase. I have player evaluations on every single U.S. player that was in camp. There were 45 of them. There is a capsule on each player there. There is a projected roster, which I'm going to talk a little bit about now. And then there's also detailing the standout performers for both the U.S. and then the European teams as well, Finland and Sweden, to give you an idea of which players really kind of up their stock here in the summer. You do have to take this with a grain of salt because it is summer. There are players that are some players are going to be in better shape than others or more prepared than others. That is something that actually, is taken into consideration. It's why the first half of the season is such an important piece. But the players that show up ready for this camp are usually going to have a real good chance to make that team later because their season kind of began already. And so it's a great preview for us to see what these players did. So the interesting thing about this U.S. roster is this is maybe one of the deepest forward groups that I've personally seen at this stage of the process. They lose Logan Cooley, who's the number one player in his birth year, but he did sign with Arizona. If you remember our last episode, it hadn't quite happened yet. Well, it happened now. He did sign with Arizona. And we don't know if he'll be available. There's always the chance that Arizona could loan him back. But if he's not, even without Cooley, this is still one of the deepest forward groups that I've been able to track. I think you go back to when the 96 and 97 born players, when you had some of the guys like Eichel and Tkachuk and Matthews, that was a little bit of a different story. But here you're seeing a team that has depth, it has experience, it has skill, it has a good balance of size and speed. So I think that this is a team that really has an opportunity to win the gold medal. And I know for the guys in the 2004 birth year, we're talking about guys like Cutter Gauthier, Rutger McGroarty, Jimmy Snuggerud, guys like that. They have been close to gold medals at multiple international events, but they have never won a gold medal at an international event. They got bronze last year at the World Juniors. They got, they got silver at their under 18 World Championship in their U18 season. No medals for the guys that played as underagers the year before at that under 18 World Championship. So they've gotten close, but haven't gotten over the hump. And so this is a team that is absolutely on a mission, especially led by those veteran players. And so what is the roster going to look like? What are we going to see Team USA do to try and maximize the depth that they have up front? Because the defense is another story. We're going to get to that in a minute. But let's talk about the forward projections here. So without Logan Cooley, it does change things a little bit. And so I'm just going to give you a quick rundown of the projected roster as you can see it, and you can read more about it on FloHockey.tv. But here are the top, the left wingers 1 through 4 that I have, or 1 through 5 rather, because USA can take up to 25 players. They can only roster 23 at any one time, but they will take 25 players, we believe. So I went with 14 forwards, 8 defensemen, and 3 goaltenders. You do have to you have 3 goalies. You can have a max of 22 skaters invited. So 3 goalies and 22 skaters. But here's how we look at the left wings. And this is where we're going to start because I have Cutter Gauthier on the wing, and he did play some center in camp. However, I look at Will Smith as a play driver, the way that he played. I like him better at the center position. So you got Cutter Gauthier flayed out to the left wing, and then you've got Rutger McGroarty. I think that's 2 guys, veteran guys, returning players, guys that can score and can play a gritty style. The next guy on the list, Isaac Howard. I thought he had a really good camp. He's a first rounder of the Tampa Bay Lightning. I don't think he's a lock for this team, but on my projected roster, based specifically on the players that were invited to camp, I thought he acquitted himself very well. He has built-in chemistry with Frank Nazar, who had a great camp, which we'll talk about him more in depth in a minute. And I just love the skill that he plays with and the plays that he was making and the tenacity that he was playing with. He's going to be in a bit of a battle with a couple of other guys, including one on the bubble that I'll talk about in a second. Also in this mix, Danny Nelson from last year's under-18 team. He's a versatile wing with speed and size. I do not think that he will be viewed as a scoring a primary scoring threat on this U.S. roster, but I could see him playing in a fourth line role as a heavy player, playing with physicality, getting defensive matchups. He's a guy that used to play defense when he was younger and now has been converted to forward. I think he'll be on the wing as opposed to center, just based on who they had in camp. So that's another one. And then another guy as an extra forward, and you could potentially throw Cole Knuble right into the top 9 here. He had a remarkable camp. Philadelphia Flyers prospect, heading to Notre Dame, the son of Mike Knuble, great player in the USHL last year with the Fargo Force. Cole Knuble is a guy that I can definitely see in the mix for this U.S. team, and also playing anywhere. He played on the power play, the PK. They gave him looks in the top 6. They gave him looks in the bottom 6. I think that he excelled no matter where they put him. And the only thing going against Cole Knuble, because he's got the motor, he has skill, he's got speed, he's not that big of a player. If that's the thing that is a tipping point, USA does have a fair amount of smaller forwards, but then they also have some size and some heaviness up front. So just finding the right balance. But I do think Cole Knuble put himself firmly in the mix for this team. And so that's my view of the left wingers. When we look at, and also I should say, Cole Knuble can play right wing, he can play center, he can play wherever. I mean, basically, it's just as an extra forward, and I listed him with the left wingers. Going down the middle, this is where things get interesting, because you don't have Logan Cooley, but I think that moves Will Smith very firmly into the number 1 center position for this team. You could potentially move Cutter Gauthier over, but I really do think Will Smith is the guy to be the play-driving, play-making center of the top line. Now you'd say, but Chris, he was a part of the junior line, the under-18 line last year that set all kinds of records. Why would you break that group up? Well, that's actually something that they did in camp. They broke up the line of Gabe Perreault, Will Smith, and Ryan Leonard. Those guys barely played together. In fact, Leonard wasn't even on the same team as the other two. They did put Perreault with Smith, try to get him going a little bit, and that did seem to help. But I think that when you looked at that trio of players, and you'll notice that I didn't mention Gabe Perreault. We're going to get to the bubble in just a second. But Gabe Perreault, of the 3 of them, seemed like he was less effective away from the other 2 than the other 2 were away from their trio. And I thought that both Leonard and Smith were very good players in this. And then I thought Perreault had a lukewarm camp, but I still think he is a special talent. I still think he's very much in the mix for this roster, especially knowing the built-in chemistry that he has with Will Smith and Ryan Leonard. Don't overthink it, but at the same time, you want roster flexibility when you're in a short tournament like this. You can't waste time, and if something isn't clicking and you know that player is not as effective away from the other players, that's when you start having some concerns. That's not to say that Gabe Perreault won't be effective come later in the year away from them, because he absolutely can be. He's a highly intelligent player. I think he can play with anybody. I just thought the other 2 showed more in camp away from that. So we've got Will Smith at the number 1 center position. Then you look at James Higgins, underager, not draft eligible until 2025. He'll be on the under 18 team this year, currently uncommitted, the number 1 target in the current recruiting class for everybody. They are trying to get a hold of James Higgins. He also has options in Major Junior. There's all different ways he can go. But at this camp, I thought he solidified himself as a potential top 6 forward on this team. He's a play-driving center, a play-making center, similar vein to Will Smith, but I think he's a bit of a better skater. He's got a little bit more quickness. There's, I got some texts from scouts that hadn't seen him yet because they were working on the previous year, and they just said, I'm seeing, Jack Hughes vibes from this guy, and I think that's fair. He's not a big guy, but he plays very confident. Speaking with the players, they have a tremendous amount of respect for James Higgins already, which is pretty remarkable to think about, that this is a young guy that's in there and he's got the respect of his teammates like that. Then you look at Frank Nazar in the next slot. Frank Nazar had the best camp of anybody with 8 points. He is the highest scoring player at the World Junior Summer Showcase. And when you think about him coming off of surgery last year, wasn't up to full speed, couldn't help Michigan as much as he would have if he was healthy and ready. And at the end of the season, because he was playing when everything was ramped up, look for him to have a huge year in college hockey. I think Frank Nazar is going to turn some heads. Chicago Blackhawks prospect, playing at the University of Michigan, and he looked spectacular in this camp, very much firmly in that center mix. But one thing you'll notice, all of these centers that we've mentioned so far, not the biggest guy. Will Smith is about 6 foot. James Hagen's 5'10". Frank Nazar 5'10", 5'11". So not big guys. And that's why I think you go back to the veteran, the guy that has been there for 3 years, or will be coming back for his third World Juniors, which hasn't happened in over a decade for a player to play in 3 consecutive World Junior Championships. Charlie Stramel. I didn't think he had a great camp, to be completely honest. I thought that he underperformed at camp. I thought there were some concerns that cropped up. However, he is a primary penalty killer. He was very good at last World Junior Championship. I can't wait to see what happens when Mike Hastings gets his hands on him at the University of Wisconsin. I think Charlie Stramel plays. He's a first-round draft pick, but he can play a role, and that is what he's going to have to do for this team, playing down the lineup, being a big, heavy, difficult to play against center. And then as another extra forward, I added Oliver Moore. Slow start to camp, incredible finish, was a goal scorer, was putting himself in good positions. I think the one thing that gives me a little bit pause here and say maybe not is I didn't think that Oliver Moore drove play consistently enough. I thought he finished a lot of plays. I didn't think he drove a lot of plays. But this is a player whose speed is a weapon. If you have him, you're automatically faster than everybody else on the ice. And that is something that I think is valuable. And that's why I have Oliver Moore over Gabe Perreault at this point in time in terms of extra forwards. And same with Cole Knuble. I just think there's a little more versatility in their games where if they're not producing, they are creating some additional value defensively as penalty killers, as guys that can play a role. So that's our look at the centers. Now down on the right side, Team USA again has depth here. They have experience. They have potentially 2 returnees and one guy that I think had a great camp and another guy who is definitely defined a role. So looking down this, you got Jimmy Snuggerud as the number 1 right wing. Even without Logan Cooley, I think he's going to have a spectacular year at Minnesota. He's a goal scorer. He's a trigger man. He didn't score a ton in camp, but he was involved in everything. He's a threatening player. He plays a heavy game. Jimmy Snuggerud, I think, is a key guy, potentially wearing a letter for this team at this tournament. Ryan Leonard is going to come in, and we talked about him a little bit earlier and how he looked good away from Will Smith and Gabe Perreault. He was able to drive play a little bit. He was able to take over shifts. He was able to be physical. He was able to score, he was a little bit snake bit. He couldn't seem to find the back of the net, but he created so many scoring chances with his quick hands and his power and his speed. So got a lot of time for him. I think he's going to be a really, really good player for Team USA at this tournament. Gavin Brindley, another returner, undersized but incredibly speedy, probably on the PK for USA, playing in key minutes. Maybe he is in the top 6. Maybe he's on your third line. I think Team USA has 3 lines with big time scoring potential and a 4th line with scoring depth pop. So that's another area to kind of keep an eye on as well, as I think that Gavin Brindley can kind of slot in wherever you need him. And lastly, Gavin Hayes, Chicago Blackhawks prospect, plays in the OHL with the Flint Firebirds. He's got scoring potential, but what I thought he did in the camp was he showed, hey, I can play a role. I can be a depth guy. I can give you good shifts. I can get to the net front. I can create some havoc. He can play on the power play. There were a lot of things that he did that I thought showed he belongs in the mix here. So that's the group. As far as guys in the bubble, I think guys like Devin Kaplan, Gabe Perreault, who I mentioned, are there. Quentin Musty, who had a very strong camp as well. Those are guys that I think are on the bubble and certainly should be in camp. And then I think you're going to also see a couple of guys that maybe didn't get invited to summer camp that get a look in the winter camp as well. Going to really quickly run through the defense here because I wanted to talk about some of the camp performers. And really what it comes down to is I think the defense battles are not to be won until November. I think there is going to be a lot of time that USA's decision makers are going to spend trying to figure out exactly how to build this blue line. I didn't think that any of the non-returning players, with the exception of maybe Eric Polkamp, who is on the projected roster, acquitted themselves well enough to say, I belong on this team. I thought that the returning guys, which is Lane Hudson, Ryan Chesley, and Seamus Casey, who did not play in last year's World Juniors, but was part of the roster of that extended roster of 25 players, I thought all 3 of them said, yeah, we're going to be among the top 4 in this. After that, it is a complete wild card. On my projected roster, I did have Drew Fortescue and Paul Fisher on the left side, along with Zeev Buyam, and then Eric Polkamp, who had a great camp. Going to Bemidji State this year, had 2 years at Cedar Rapids, and this is a guy that just plays a hard physical game, even though he's not that big of a guy, and he's got a heck of a shot, really good mobility. And then I think one of the real wild cards of this entire process is going to be Sam Renzel, Chicago Blackhawks first-round draft pick. He had a really good start to camp, not a great finish. I think there's got to be some more maturity in his game, but he is stronger. He's a good skater. He was the biggest defenseman in the camp. That's a guy that I think you want to look at long and hard and say, hey, maybe we do still have room for a player with his skill set. And then lastly, just wanted to go through the goaltending. Trey Augustine and Jacob Fowler, as we expected, are going to be the top two guys for this team. I think that they both are going to play significant roles for their college teams this year. Michigan State for Augustine, Boston College for Fowler. I think that those are two guys that are absolutely going to be in the mix for, to play games. After that, I think the open position is that third goalie position. Of the guys in camp, I thought Hampton Slakinski, the LA Kings prospect, had the best camp. But Tyler Musialik is a veteran guy. And then you have Andrew Oak, who's actually been the third goalie in the last two World Juniors. So I think it'll actually end up coming down to Musialik or Slakinski. And then maybe at that point you lean towards the veteran because you're not expecting to have to need that third goalie very much. But that's the projected roster. And if you look at it, I think up front, you're really excited. On the back end, you're a little concerned. And then in goal, I think you feel very comfortable about either Augustine or Fowler. And then Augustine already has World Junior experience. He's been on that stage. So that's really good. I think coming out of camp, you look at the way that Frank Nazar played and you say that's really encouraging for our forward group because he's healthy. He looked great. Lane Hudson, as dynamic as anybody, he scored an incredible goal in this camp and really was a guy that I thought, took the charge of being the number one defenseman. He had the puck a lot. It's very dangerous with that. But I'd say as far as open positions on this team, you're looking at about four to five defensemen that you still have to sort out. I think you really only have three that you could write in ink on your roster, and that's Hudson, Chesley, and Casey. I think Polkamp made a very strong case for himself. Beyond that, you have to figure it out. They're heavy on the right side. They don't have as much talent on the left side, so there are going to be some decisions to be made in terms of which guys can play on their off wing and all that other stuff. Meanwhile, you've also got on the wings, I think the centers that I mentioned are all pretty much dialed in, but on the wings, you look at Quentin Musty, Gabe Perreault, Ike Howard, Danny Nelson is kind of that quad of guys that are probably battling each other for various spots on the roster, Knubel, that. And then if you bring in Logan Cooley, if he comes back from Arizona, which is a distinct possibility, then you have to start making additional decisions. I think that pushes guys maybe like Oliver Moore out of the picture, or maybe it pushes Cole Knubel out of the picture. Those are the types of things that you have to weigh. But I think USA is going to have forward depth like they've never had before. They're going to have less on the blue line, but they're also going to have goaltending that they feel confident about. So this is a team that is absolutely competing for a gold medal at this World Junior Championship. All right. So again, want you to make sure that you check out all of the content. There is so much more detail than I can provide here in this podcast on FloHockey.tv. But certainly wanted to summarize for you, save you a little bit of time, and point you in the right direction. Now we move on and talk about the Hlinka-Gretzky Cup. And this is a tournament that every single year is exciting. It is interesting. And in the end, I think we probably have to take the results and also the performances with a grain of salt. But it does give us that baseline of players that we should be keeping a close eye on for the remainder of the season. Canada once again won the Hlinka-Gretzky Cup, but by the skin of their teeth. They score a late goal in overtime. Malcolm Spence, who's not draft eligible until 2025, scores to beat Czechia in a spectacular final. The Czechs gave Canada everything they could handle. They had great skill up front. They had a tough defense. They had good goaltending. But in the end, Canada wins the Hlinka-Gretzky Cup. Again, this tournament, when we think about it, we're going to think about Berkeley Catton. We're going to think about the way that he played for Team Canada. 10 points, tied for the tournament lead in scoring, was a dominant player. Everything positive that Canada was doing, he seemed to be driving. Even when they weren't playing their best, he was at a different level. And that is where we talk about a player, and there's actually a question about him later in our Q&A. That's a memorable performance that sticks in our mind, and that gives Berkeley Catton an opportunity to build off of that for the remainder of the season. Now, we saw guys last year like Braden Yeager and Callum Ritchie have spectacular World or Hlinka-Gretzky Cups. They end up going a bit later in the first round. I think Catton is in the mix to be a potential top 5, top 7 pick in this draft. We know that there's a lot of good defensemen available. We know that there's a lot of, it's the Macklin Celebrini draft. There's Ivan Demidov, and these are, the forwards that he's going to compete with. But Catton has at least put himself on the radar as a legit top-tier prospect for this draft, and we'll continue to watch him for that. When we look at the other performances throughout the tournament, one of the ones that sticks out is the U.S. Trevor Connolly was the leading scorer for Team USA. They finished third. This is at the Hlinka-Gretzky Cup, when they don't have the National Team Development Program players, they need guys to step up. Trevor Connolly did, as an experienced USHL player, as a guy that had a great rookie season with Tri-City last year, and I think he established himself as a first-round option. Now, if you've heard the name Trevor Connolly before, or you haven't, there are some mitigating circumstances. Teams are doing a lot of due diligence on him due to some off-ice concerns. He got kicked off of his AAA team right before the national championship for some disciplinary issues. There has been a lot of effort to work through that and work past some of the immaturity and different things like that. It's not, there's nothing criminal. Like, I know that the people, when we kind of start talking about character concerns and different things, I think Mitchell Miller is the name that comes up right away. This isn't that case. This isn't that scenario. But I think it is something that teams are actively looking at. And we'll get into it more. There are obviously a lot of details that I don't personally have about what happened and what transpired. But this is a player that a lot of teams are going to do due diligence on to determine whether or not they should draft him. And I think they're going to look a lot harder, because this is a guy that says, hey, I mean, based on talent, you would say this is a first-round draft pick. He had 10 points at the Hlinka-Gretzky Cup. He was an instant guy last year where he made an instant impact, and he's heading to Providence College after next season. So it's a name to remember. It's a name to continue to look out for, and it is also one that NHL teams are continually doing due diligence on. But you have to give, from an on-ice perspective only, I think that Connolly really did put himself on the map and is going to put teams in a position where they say, let's make sure we have all our T's crossed, our I's dotted. Let's make sure we know who this player is, and before we make any decisions about the draft. So that is what you should do about every player. But obviously some require a different kind of set of circumstances, but that's one to keep an eye out. Another guy that really, I think, will be remembered for this tournament is Adam Benak. And this is a young player who 2007 born, and we were all focused on Michael Misa, who's the exceptional player. He had a great tournament as well, 8 points for him. But Adam Benak is a small player, 5'7", 140 pounds or so. This is a small young man in terms of, what we look at. He's still growing. He's 16. There's plenty of time. He had 6 points at last year's Under-17 World Hockey Challenge. He had 10 points in this tournament, including 8 assists, and was one of the most dynamic players there. And, I'm going to have to drill down into the video a bit more. He's obviously not draft eligible until 2025, but that is a player that we have to keep an eye on now. And you think back to a couple of years ago at this tournament, Dalibor Dvorsky was the guy that took the tournament by storm. This year was Adam Benak. We're going to have to keep a real close eye on him. A lot of guys had really good World or Hlinka-Gretzky Cups. And I think that what this showed was that there are a number of Canadian players that we saw in this tournament that we thought looked like top-tier draft talent that probably have a lot more to prove. That we're going to have to wait and see how their season plays out. I'm thinking about guys like Zane Parekh, who kind of ended up down the lineup. Sam Dickinson, who is probably one of the most gifted athletes of the class, but there's still concerns. One guy that I think really did stand out, Henry Muse, who we have a question about that we'll address later, but that's another guy that he led all defensemen in scoring with 7 points. And then I think if we were looking at goaltending for this event, certainly not something that we would view as a strength. in this particular class based on what we already know about some of the guys that we had in last draft. I don't think we have the depth this year to go through it, but there's plenty more to be learned about this 2024 draft class. We're going to talk a lot about it throughout the entire season, just as we did. I'll be writing about it a lot as well. But I think when you look at that Canadian roster and you say, there are some guys that absolutely perform to a high standard, and there are some guys that we're going to want to see a little bit more out of as the season progresses. And we also have to keep in mind it's August. Not these guys are not in midseason form, and it just reminds us how long a draft season is. The fact that it starts in late July and then basically goes until you're drafted in June. It is a long process. It is grueling, and these players deserve a lot of credit for when they get through it as well as they do, because that is something that is certainly important. All right, as we do every single episode, we are going to open the floor to questions. I put it out on Twitter, X, whatever we're calling it now, a call for questions, and I kind of left it open-ended. Got a lot of questions about players that were at the World Junior Summer Showcase, and that's where we're going to start. But we're going to focus more on the World Juniors. Then we're going to get in a little bit of the 2024 NHL Draft, a little bit about the 2023-24 NHL season, and then also a little bit about college recruiting. So let's get to those questions now. Let's get through them. And our first question comes from Avco Cup, a frequent questioner, and this is about Canada and the World Juniors. And the question is, why did Canada decide not to hold the World Junior Summer Camp this year? Will this have any negative impact on team performance when the tournament starts? All right, well, let's get to the first part. Canada is still, Hockey Canada is still reeling from the financial implications of the 2018 World Junior scandal that really rocked the country and cost a lot of people their jobs. And we saw there is now a new board in Hockey Canada. There is a new CEO. There are a lot of people in leadership positions that are going to potentially change things. That alone, however, did not bring back all the sponsors that Hockey Canada lost. And what also happened is if the sponsors didn't completely drop Hockey Canada, they asked to have their funds redirected towards the women's national team program. And that is what Hockey Canada did. So that meant no program of excellence camps this year. So Canada has the program of excellence, which is different from the national team development program that USA Hockey does. Basically, they get all their players into these camps. They're from the youth. They get basically their tryouts for the U17 Challenge, their tryouts for the Hlinka-Gretzky. They work in their World Junior tryouts and all that other stuff that happens. And it's a very intense, couple of weeks of hockey. That didn't happen this year. Hockey Canada did have a meeting with their players. They had a pool of, I believe, 45 players that were invited to participate in their summer orientation, which was basically a video conference where everybody got to get on the same page. Coaches got to talk about expectations, but now you lose that camp element. What you ultimately lose? I don't think you worry so much about the evaluation, although you look at the way that Canada started the Hlinka-Gretzky Cup with a dramatic loss, and where they just bled goals for the whole game. It showed that they weren't quite ready to go. They got better as the tournament wore on, but they weren't quite ready to go. That's where the camp comes into play. So that doesn't affect you at the World Juniors, because I think Hockey Canada will still have their winter camp with a select group of players, and then they'll go over to Gothenburg, Sweden for the tournament. But basically, I don't think it'll have a profoundly negative impact, because the actual camp process, once you get to the World Juniors, that team's together 2 weeks before the tournament starts. They essentially spend a month together. And so I don't think that it'll have a negative impact on their performance. But if you do look at the Canadian roster and you look at the U.S. roster side by side, especially if there's no Connor Bedard, no Adam Fantilli, are there other players that'll be missing? I think this is, Hockey Canada is going to have some very difficult decisions to make, and not because of depth decisions. There's just a lot of players that are question marks at this point. But really good question, and we'll see. I'm sure Canada will have their camps reinstated once the funding returns from the sponsors. But yeah, that is the reason that there were no camps this year. All right, we got a question from Charlie, and this is about a player that was at the World Junior Summer Showcase playing for Sweden. And Charlie asks, what would you say the ceiling is for Philip Bystedt as an NHLer? Well, Philip Bystedt, first-round draft pick of the San Jose Sharks, finished the camp with a hat trick in the final game that Sweden ended up narrowly losing to USA on a late goal by fellow Sharks prospect Quentin Musty. But the thing about Bystedt is I think the question is, I think he's going to be a middle six center. I think that his ceiling is number 2 center. I don't think when you see a player at his size and his speed, you would hope that maybe there's a chance that he could be a number 1 center. I just don't see him as a play driver in the same way that you look at like Will Smith, who's also now a San Jose Sharks prospect, drives play from the center position. Philip Bystedt is a power center. He gets to the middle very well. He makes plays. There's a lot to like about his game. But I just don't see that I think whether it's a hockey sense thing or just an execution thing, I haven't seen enough from him over the last couple of years to say that guy is going to be a number 1 center. I do think that there's potential to be a number 2 center. I think at worst he's a number 3 and a good number 3 center at that. With his size, speed, and skill, there's a lot to work with. So I think he's got a great ceiling. As soon as he gets into the mix with the Sharks and they can kind of start developing him for the role that they expect him to play long term, I think that'll be a good thing. Playing in Sweden against men, continuing at the professional level, trying to be a more dominant player. I think I got a lot of time for him. I think he's going to be a really solid player for the Sharks long term. All right. Our next question comes from Oda. And Oda asks, should Lenny Haminaho have been a first-round pick? So Lenny Haminaho was one of the best players for Finland at the World Junior Summer Showcase. He was the second leading scorer among all players with 7 points. He was really good at driving play. He was making good reads. He was making good passes. He was getting shots on net. All of that is to say there is a good prospect there in Lenny Haminaho. The thing that I think is harder to say is there a dynamic element to him that suggests he's going to be a top-end producer at the NHL level? That's a little bit less certain, but he was an efficient player. He wasn't fancy. He made plays. Last year, he played all season at the professional level in Finland. He got stronger. He's hard to knock off the puck. He's good at getting the puck back. He's good in puck pursuit. He can play. He was on the World Junior team last year. Fully expect him to play an even bigger role this year. But Lenny Haminaho was outstanding. And I think that, as good as he was, I still don't think in this particular class last year that he fit for me as a first-round draft pick. I think there's good value in where the Devils drafted him, 58th overall. I think that he is a guy that is probably a good middle six wing long term, and that's a great thing to have. You want to have guys like that. But he had a great camp, no question about it. He came in ready, and he helped a team that was really struggling to score some points in that event. So Lenny Haminaho, not a first rounder, but certainly a good prospect and one I think that the Devils should be happy to have. All right, our next question comes from Joseph, and this is based off of some recent news. And Joseph asks, why are some Finnish picks, Haltunen and Kumpalainen, going to the OHL for their Draft Plus One season? So, Kasper Haltunen is a guy that had a chance to go in the first round last year, didn't end up going as a second round pick. And he is now going to the London Knights in the OHL. So that is, for him, that is a decision. He signed his contract as well. So that's basically, I think one of the reasons is to go to the junior route. For one, it gives your NHL team a little bit more control and a little more contact with you if you're here as opposed to there. That's not to say that teams don't have contact with their players in Europe. They do. But I think in Haltunen's case, you want to try and get him under your developmental wing as best you can. I think at London in particular, They're going to have guys around him that can help him be a solid player. He's physically more advanced than most of the players he's going to play against. He's got some pro experience in Finland's top pro league, playing 27 games last year. But you also have to remember he didn't necessarily score a lot. And there were also times where he didn't necessarily play a whole lot when he got opportunities at Liga. So this allows him to get more ice time. It allows him to play in a role that, that ultimately could help him get the results that he needs to kind of open up the rest of his offensive game. He didn't really produce last year the way that we thought he would, and now he gets an opportunity to go to the OHL. Same thing with Kumpalainen, who's a Minnesota Wild draft pick. He's heading to the Oshawa Generals, and I think for him, he did not get many pro reps last year. He played a couple of games in Finland's lower division, Mestis, and then played primarily at the U20 level. So this is a chance for him to step up the league that he was playing in. Maybe he also has information that that he wouldn't get a role on the pro team. He's not yet signed by Minnesota, unlike Haltunen, who was signed by San Jose. But what he's able to do now is kind of make that transition to North America, be under the eye of the Minnesota Wild, and it gives him an opportunity, to continue to develop at a level that he's comfortable at. And he doesn't, because some of these guys will go in and playing pro hockey. It's not the best fit for everybody. It's not the best fit for every 19-year-old. And when they don't get the ice time at the pro level, that's when things kind of compound. And then, you start worrying about development, losing time, different things like that. I think that players should fight through those challenges more often than not. It helps build character, but it also helps them become better players. But at the same time, it's not like Kumpalainen had lit the Finnish U20 ranks on fire last year. He's a bit of a longer-term project. He's a guy that's going to need some time because he's got size, he's got strength, but we need to see a little bit more from him in terms of his overall offensive potential. All right. Our next question, another draft-related question, and this involves some players that were at the World Junior Summer Showcase, and we can opine a little bit more. And this one comes from Jay Gregory. And the question is, would you have taken Gabe Perreault over Oliver Moore if you were the Chicago Blackhawks? Well, they both were there. And I think the thing is that every team, whether or not, we talk about best player available a lot, but I think teams are more focused on fit, and how, how is this player going to fit within what we've built? And I think in the case of the Blackhawks, Oliver Moore made more sense to them. It strengthened them down the middle. It gave them a fast player. It gave them a player that has high character and a guy that they really spent a lot of time on. He's not, they could probably still stand to get bigger up front. That's probably one of the issues the Blackhawks still have. And neither of those players would have helped you in that regard. So I think the one thing about Moore is, as a center, he's got a bit more versatility. He's not as good a scorer or offensive player as Gabe Perreault. And the debate becomes then, well, wouldn't you love to have an elite playmaker, a guy with incredible vision in Gabe Perreault, a guy who, kind of grew up in Chicago with his dad, Yannick Perreault, working for the Chicago Blackhawks, and, a guy that made a lot of sense. I think it made sense. But again, you're looking at fit, and the Blackhawks do need to get better on the wing, no question about it. I think that Perreault is likely to be a long-term wing. I just don't think the defensive capabilities that he has are as sound, but I think you just get a little bit more from Moore in terms of compete, in terms of motor, in terms of speed. Absolutely speed. I mean, and I think as everybody's looking to get faster, there are unique skaters. Now, I had them listed in, I eventually did move Perreault very late in the process ahead of Moore. But I think if I'm the Chicago Blackhawks, I can totally see where it was. Maybe there was another option available to them there. I don't necessarily think that it would have to be like Perreault versus Moore. But based on how excited the Blackhawks were about drafting Moore, obviously that was their guy the whole way, and they were stunned that he was still there. And frankly, so was I. And I was also stunned that Gabe Perreault went as far down as he went. But that's the way it goes. All right. If you are a Montreal Canadiens fan, you can't get enough on Lane Hutson, can you? Well, Habs on Reddit, on Twitter, or wherever, had this to ask, and I'm not surprised. Hey, Chris, what kind of sophomore season do you see Lane Hutson having at BU? All right, well, let's go back to Lane Hutson's freshman season. We've talked about him a lot on this podcast, and I don't mind it because he's one of my favorite players to watch. And at the World Junior Summer Showcase, he was awesome in terms of the puck skills that he plays with. So let's take a look. Last year, Lane Hutson had 48 points. 48 points for his freshman season. One of the highest scoring seasons in the history of the NCAA for a freshman defenseman. Keep in mind, Cale Makar, as a freshman, had 21 points in 34 games. His following season, he had 49 points in 41 games. So if you say, well, if he can match Cale Makar's production in his Hobie Baker season, maybe that's a good one. But now we've already seen Hutson put up 48 points. The guy that I think he's really chasing in terms of impact, certainly Makar is one of them because he won a Hobie Baker Award. But one of the guys that I think was truly exceptional at the collegiate level was Adam Fox. And Adam Fox had 48 points in 33 games in his final season of college hockey at Harvard. He was a junior, so he was a bit older at that point. But this is a guy who put up 40-plus points twice in his collegiate career and was averaging an insane amount of points that season. I think that Lane Hutson has the potential, especially because Boston University is going to have a very good team this year. They're getting Macklin Celebrini. They're bringing in Tom Willander. They're bringing in, some transfers as well that are going to help them more immediately. They are pretty special. But if I look at what Adam Fox did in his sophomore season, he had 1.45 points per game. 1.45 points per game from the blue line. And he did not win the Hobie Baker because Cale Makar was the more impactful player, scored more goals, and certainly I think was the more impactful player. But you'd have to say it was neck and neck there. And now both of those guys have won Norris trophies. But I think Lane Hutson, a very realistic possibility for him based on what he did last season, assuming he stays healthy and assuming Boston University goes far, I think it is not out of the question for him to hit somewhere in the 55 to 60 point range, which frankly we don't see very often at all at the collegiate level from a defenseman. If he does that, he's got a great chance to win the Hobie Baker. Boston University has a great chance to win a national championship, and Lane Hutson has a great chance to go down as one of the most exciting college hockey defensemen we've ever seen. And after his freshman season, I cannot wait to see what he has up his sleeve for Act 2. And we got a little taste of it at the World Junior Summer Showcase. Pretty darn good. All right, let's move on to our next question. And this one comes from Shokunin. And this is a threefer. This is kind of cheating a little bit, but I'll allow it. The first question is, what is your projection for Cutter Gauthier in the NHL? Is he a number one play driving center? The next question is, do you think Pavel Mintyukov makes Anaheim at the start of the season? And lastly, has Berkeley Catton put himself in the upper tier of the draft? So the last question I pretty much answered earlier in an earlier segment, but yes, Berkeley Catton, I think, has absolutely solidified himself for the preseason in that mode where he is among the guys like the Celebrinis and Levshunov and Cole Iserman and Demidov. Like I don't think he's as good as those guys, but I think he belongs in that next tier kind of right there. So, that's an upper tier in the end. I think a top 5, top 6, top 7 kind of guy heading into the season. As far as Cutter Gauthier goes, I think he is a difficult player to project because the question is does he drive play enough to be a number one center? I think he's a tremendous goal scorer. He's one of the best athletes just in terms of his size, his speed is just everything. There is a tremendous skill set there. and the package of tools that he has at his disposal is there. But I think there are valid concerns about the hockey sense in terms of, is he a playmaker? Does he get tunnel vision too much sometimes? Can he be dynamic enough to beat defenders one-on-one? Can he make his line mates better? Is he good enough defensively? So in terms of play driving, I think that he could be more of a finishing center. But I think, you watch him play and you just, in terms of his size, his physical makeup, his athleticism, his shot, you say, oh, there are rhymes. It's with Austin Matthews, and not that but the difference is that Matthews has an elite hockey mind, and I think Gauthier is closer to average. And again, average can work. Average NHL average can work with his skill set and that package of tools at his disposal. I think we're going to learn a lot about him this season. He's going to be playing center a lot, I think. Excuse me, but I do think that he is one of the more interesting prospects to track, because as he brings more into his game, there's more of a possibility that he does become that number one center projection. And if you do get a top 6 center out of a top 5 pick, it's still a pretty effective pick. So I think I got a lot of time for Cutter Gauthier. As far as if I think Mintyukov will make the Anaheim squad at the start of the season, I think he's got a great chance to. There's not a lot of roadblocks. Anaheim did bring in some veteran free agents that will help usher in some of these younger players. You got to get Jamie Drysdale healthy. But I think in terms of what you do with Mintyukov at this point is, you kind of get him into camp, and there really can't be any determination until we see how much work he's put in over the summer, how prepared he is, how much physically stronger he is, if he's making plays at NHL pace. Those are the questions that still have to be answered before we can make a determination on him. All right. Our next question comes from Nabil, and this is 2024 NHL Draft related. And yes, we're going to get a lot of 2024 NHL Draft talk here in the coming weeks, even though it is just under a year away. It's never too early. But let's get to Nabil's question here, which is starts off, hope you're having a great summer, Chris. Thanks for the August podcast. You are very welcome. It's my pleasure to do them. It's great to talk to fellow hockey sickos that want to talk hockey when it's 95 degrees outside. A lot of talk about Ivan Demidov recently, and some saying he's a better prospect than Michkov. As of right now, what's your opinion? Who is the better prospect? Really interesting question, and the fact of the matter is, I haven't yet seen enough from Demidov, who I think is a very good prospect, to say he's better than Michkov. And the simple reason I think Michkov's hockey sense is next level. I think it is up there with some of the best players that I've tracked in terms of guys that I've watched. I think that he has some of the best goal scoring sense of any player. I think he just knows how to play the game. Meanwhile, Demidov had a ridiculous season last year in the U20 ranks in Russia. And it puts him in a position, and he's been playing in the preseason with SKA's top pro team, but it puts him in position to be a KHLer right now. And as we know, for SKA, which is one of the best teams in with St. Petersburg, that is a team that is absolutely going to, give him an opportunity. He had 62 points in 41 games in the MHL last season. He's got strength. He's a little bit bigger than Michkov. I think he'll round out and to be stronger. He's a late 2005 birth date, so he's going to be a little bit older for this next draft class, and I think that also gives him a little bit of a leg up to play a little more KHL time this year. In terms of what he's done so far in the preseason, he looks like a pro. He looks like he belongs, and he looks like they actually had him playing with Michkov, who was centering a line for SKA in their summer tournament. And so that's interesting too. I did not anticipate we'd see Matvei Michkov in the middle at any point with such little defensive value in his game. But I don't think that we can say yet that Demidov is there. And the other thing is that Demidov doesn't have all these positional benchmarks that we saw with Michkov. Michkov was always a top scorer. Demidov played for the last Hlinka-Gretzky Cup team. He played at the last Youth Olympics, and he did fine. Like, he was, in terms of production, he was fine. He was a point per game player at the Hlinka-Gretzky. And that's those, but those are benchmark events that we can compare to Michkov, and Michkov exploded at those tournaments at the same age. So that makes it a little bit tougher with a player like Demidov to say that he's better than Michkov. I will say, though, he looks every bit like a guy that's a threat to go in the top 3 of this NHL draft, and potentially challenge for the top 2. I still think Macklin Celebrini is the most complete player in this draft coming into it. But boy, Ivan Demidov gives you a lot to look forward to, and that is a name that you should absolutely know because he is something special. All right, we got a question about this year's rookie class for the NHL, and a lot of guys moving up. And this one comes from Anthony. And Anthony asks, who are the top 3 rookies that no one expects? I think Riker Evans could be up there. Well, I'm not sure exactly what no one expects, like in terms of if we don't expect them to compete for the Calder or different things like that. I'm really excited to see those guys. I mean, I think that Riker Evans is a great call out. He had a tremendous AHL season. Does that necessarily mean that he's ready to step into a full-time NHL role and be a contributor? We'll see. I mean, he's only 1 year removed from junior, but he's put himself in a position. We'll see how camp goes. That's a guy that keep an eye out for. Another guy that I think I don't necessarily know if he'll make the Sabres because they're a lot deeper now, but a guy who's going to put himself in a position is Yuri Kulik, who we've talked about in this podcast before. Just a tremendous goal-scoring season at the AHL level, a guy that I think has a ton of talent, and in that goal-scoring threat ability of his puts him in a position to potentially make the Sabres. So that's a guy that I'm kind of keeping an eye on that maybe we're not thinking about or talking about as much or maybe enough. Obviously, there are the guys like Cooley. I think we're going to see a couple of other signings here from guys that are eligible to sign on August 15th that might get a couple of looks. But I don't think I can give you 3 rookies because I think all the ones. It's such a deep rookie class this year. When you think about the fact that there's going to be Cooley, there's going to be Bedard, there's going to be Shane Wright. Does he come back and is he full-time rookie? There are a lot of players that are going to be in the mix for big time roles with their teams. And I think Riker Evans, who you mentioned, is one of those guys. All right, got another question from Danny. Everyone's looking forward to the big name freshmen coming in like Celebrini and the NTDP line. Who are some of the under the radar freshmen you're looking forward to watching this year? One guy that I think we've talked about in this podcast already, Cole Knuble. After the summer camp that he just had with Team USA, he's going to go into Notre Dame and he's going to be an immediate impact player. I've loved his game in USHL last year. I'm glad that he got drafted. I think he deserved to be drafted by Philadelphia. He's a smaller player, but he's got spark plug capabilities. I think anytime you look at guys that are coming into college hockey as freshmen, you don't just look at those true freshmen. Cole Knubel's he'll be an older freshman. You want to look at some of those guys that have a little bit more experience. I think you look at Ryan Walsh, who had a great season at Cedar Rapids, got drafted by Boston, heading to Cornell. He was the second leading scorer in the USHL behind Macklin Celebrini last year. He's got a chance to be a top-tier player. Nick Moldenauer going to the University of Michigan and giving him he's a guy that was drafted highly, produced at a high level. He's part of that Chicago Steel to Ann Arbor pipeline. Those are guys that I think could have a significant impact on their respective rosters. You look at some of the other guys too, like Aiden Fink, who's going to Penn State. That's a big time commit for them. He's going to play an impact role right away. He was the top player in the AJHL. And so those guys are big timers. And we're also waiting to find out as well from NCAA Clearinghouse if is Artem Duda going to be cleared to play for Maine. And if he is, that's a big time player. I don't know how he will be, considering that he played in the KHL, but he is a high end player that would be an impact player at the collegiate level. So those are some of the names to think about beyond the guys that we all know. You can also throw in Bradley Nadeau in there, who's a first-round draft pick, and really excited to see what he does at Maine. But a lot of good players there. So, Danny, thank you for the question. Really looking forward to this college hockey season. We're going to have a ton of great non-conference games, and obviously the CCHA and Atlantic Hockey on FloHockey this year. All right, let's wrap this sucker up with one more question, and it is another Chicago Blackhawks fan chiming in. This one comes from Dan. Dan says, looking for names of guys beyond typical Kevin Korchinski, Frank Nazar, Drew Commesso on the Hawks that are flying under the radar. I'm interested in a dark horse candidate that with a little luck or the right opportunity could make an impact, even bottom six, over the next season or two. One guy to keep an eye on, not for next season, but the season after, is Ryan Green, who currently plays at Boston University. I really like his game. I think he's a two-way center with size, with competitiveness. I think that's one of the guys for the Chicago Blackhawks that you say, this guy has a chance to really be a top-tier player for us. I'm not meaning like a top-tier prospect, I should say. And by that, I mean a guy that you feel is going to play NHL games and going to play NHL games at a young age and be impactful. He still has a ways to go, but that's a guy that I think that, came out of the USHL, played a great season at Boston University last year. That is a name to know amid all the glitz and all the glamour. He's the kind of guy that could potentially play a third or fourth line role for your team. And the way he plays, he's going to endear himself to fans really, really quickly. So that is a dark horse name to think about. Well, that just about does it. That wraps up our questions. If I didn't get to your questions this week, I'll try to get to them next time. We won't be back next week, but we'll be back in a few as we continue to prepare for the 2023-24 season. We'll have plenty more to talk about. We've got lots coming up, a lot of live hockey coming up on FloHockey. You can still watch the Beauty League as well. So make sure you are on FloHockey for a ton of coverage of a number of events. So we've got a lot more as we prepare for the season. So do not miss any of that. Huge thanks to everybody that asked questions today. My thanks to Tyler for producing, and also for all of you for listening, for sticking with us, for hanging out in the summer and making sure that you are still getting your hockey fix. Just keep in mind, you want to download this podcast. You can find us on YouTube. You can find us on FloHockey.tv, anywhere you get podcasts in the audio format. But that is going to do it for this week's episode of Talking Hockey Sense. My thanks again to you for joining me. My name is Chris Peters. We'll see you next time.